I recently quit running one of my D&D campaigns, and in today's video I'll discuss how and why it happened, and what you guys can do to avoid this situation. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Lair. Recently, I decided to quit running a long-standing campaign that I've been doing every Wednesday for the last 2 to 3 years. The current campaign's been going on probably for about a year. There was a lot of build-up to this decision, but I want to speak to you guys today about the main things that led to this decision and what can be learned from it. For context, my campaign is set in the equivalent of 13th century France, with a lot of necromancers causing problems. I used the Backstories module by Greg Gillespie as the main source of content, and had most of the adventures centered around the vast swampland, as well as the Barrow Maze itself, which is a vast mega dungeon filled with undead, monstrosities, gargoyles, and the like. On a week-to-week basis, especially near the start of my campaign, my players would delve into the swamps, plunder crypts, and fight the various monsters and factions that reside within the area. These were mostly things like frogmen, fishfolk, harpies, and undead. This was my first time trying to properly run a mega dungeon and do it in the form of a module. And I can't deny that I fell into a lot of the same pitfalls that I think other dungeon masters fall into. I found it difficult to create direction for my players, and I noticed that many of them were struggling to proactively push the story forward. I think a lot of players are used to the comfort of a continuous story, like a module, where the players can kind of ride the railroad roller coaster, if you will. The Barrow Maze really requires one of two things. A, the Dungeon Master has to create lots of plot hooks to give the players directive to actually explore the Barrow Maze. The other option is the players need to create their own goals and proactively push the story towards dungeon delving and plundering treasure. The book doesn't really reiterate this too much, and if it did, I didn't really see that when I was reading the book as many times as I have. But I think even the best of modules require dungeon masters to really get outside of their comfort zone with improv and sandbox content in order to actually make the game a great experience for everyone. One of the quests was actually following this idea, and it was that the old wizard in the tower to the north of town wanted the party to take paper and chalk, explore a specific part of the Barrow Maze, so the mega dungeon, this massive crypt mega dungeon, find a obelisk in one of the rooms. That is this quite famous obelisk, and there's not many obelisks in there, so it wasn't too difficult to find, and basically get rubbings on the paper with the chalk of the ancient inscription that is actually depicted on the obelisk itself. The quest is relatively simple, right? Get in, get out, get the rubbings, no problem. But 2 players died during the adventure. I think I tried to toe the line between modern and old school gaming, and I do have quite a challenging experience for players who perhaps make bad decisions or get unlucky with dice rolls or random encounters. But I think in hindsight, maybe it shouldn't have happened, because it didn't really add anything to the story or the narrative. It actually derailed my story quite a lot. And I think the big issue that my campaign had was that it had a story to begin with. And it was a long form story too, which I think is the main problem. When I started the game, I had a lot of players who enjoyed making vast backstories and creating these atypical modern 5e D&D characters. You know what I'm talking about, tieflings, furbolgs. I didn't have players who were making that, but I had players who were creating like vast backstories and really trying to give their characters a lot of personality, and that causes players to get quite invested in their characters. If you're going to spend like hours writing a backstory, it's fair to say you're probably going to get invested, right? We're not talking about a turnip farmer who has been forced to fight. We're talking about a fledgling hero with aspirations and goals, most of which were likely written without really considering the setting or the campaign or the world that the players were going to be playing in. I did, however, try to compromise with my players when they made their characters to have them be what they want them to be, but fit into the world, if that makes sense. And the same way you would if, for example, you were playing a campaign in Dark Sun, right? Which is the campaign where there's no water and everybody's in the desert and there's necromancers and stuff like that. Right. My campaign is a setting. It has... it doesn't have all the race options available. I don't also allow certain subclasses in 5e. I'm sure those of you who know anything about 5e know there is like 69 supplemental books. There's so many spells now, so many subclasses, and I just find it all a bit overwhelming as a dungeon master. And I don't really believe that all these options actually provide any real value to players. It just overcomplicates being a DM and also being a player if you're a spellcaster. In my opinion, trying to adapt my world and create lore for like your tabaxi monk doesn't really fit into the fun experience that I want for myself at the table. And I'm pretty sure that most of these people would be just as happy playing a human monk from one of the local temples, worshipping one of the gods that I've actually written up information about and created for my world, if that makes sense. I think some players are just a bit inconsiderate in their character ideas, and I think that they have been empowered by certain D&D channels that it's okay to bully and push around dungeon masters, and I don't think that's okay. I think if you're coming to a table, I think it's really up to the dungeon master, the world that you're going to be playing in. I mean, sure, you can have a discussion about it if the dungeon master's not too sure about what they want to do, but I think it's really the DM's choice in the setting that you're playing, what you're allowed to roll as, like what class options, or sorry, race options are available. If wizards are outlawed in the world and they've been killed off, maybe wizards aren't a playable class, I don't know. I think it's really up to the dungeon master to set these restrictions, if they want to have restrictions at all. Yeah, I think my campaigns are very like Monty Python, Princess Bride, Willow, those kind of stories, those kind of movies, if you've watched any of those movies. And I think that some people just don't really get that or want to support that idea. They want to do their own thing. They want like personal arcs, personal stories, and that's absolutely fine. But I just don't really think that's what I want from my games anymore, you know? I think running a game with an old school mentality or with an old school module like the Baramaze, and I would definitely consider it old school. The fact that there's actually traps in the Baramaze which are save or die, that's a very like OSR mechanic. I don't really see that in a lot of 5e content. I don't think a lot of 5e players like the idea that their character could just fucking die like that. I think a lot of old school players are used to the idea, and it makes the game more exciting and thrilling. That like, oh, I actually figured out that this trap was here. We could have died. That's really cool, you know. But you know, chalk and cheese, right? Different types of people like different strokes for different folks, right? If you are going to allow your players to create level 1 characters, level 1 heroes, right, who have already done great things in their backstories, then you should really be running a campaign where character death is an illusion. The players may think it's going to happen, but it rarely does, right? Maybe you fudge some dice, yeah, let them get away with it, right? It's pretty clear that those kind of players, they are playing for the character story. They want to see progression, they want to experience a second life, and they want to feel like they've earned it, even if sometimes they haven't. They don't want to get killed by a trap or a random encounter, even if it was telegraphed, right? They were given warning that it could happen. That will probably make them want to leave your campaign, and I've had players who've left my campaigns because their characters have died in the past. And I think this is what people should really be speaking about when discussing game expectations in session zeros, rather than this long, extensive checklist, or when you're advertising your game in the first place. This is the main expectation that needs to be discussed. Do you want a game where your actions matter and death could be waiting around every corner in a dungeon? Or do you want a game where you get to play out a fancy life, watch your character develop and grow, and see your goals become reality, all knowing a while that your character is unlikely to die, right? Is unlikely to die. There's lots of safety nets. The DM kind of throws you guys a bone. And I know it's not necessarily black and white. I know there are people who are kind of in the middle, that they want to give their characters goals and aspirations and backstories, but they also love the thrill of a hard fight. But I've actually very rarely had players who are kind of in the middle in my games. I see those players as unicorns, and I know this because I believe I am one. I believe I am one of those kind of players. So I think my thought is that maybe the Barra Maze wasn't right for the players. Not those players that I had currently, but the players I had in the past. And this mentality that I was perpetuating by allowing and encouraging my players to invest in backstories for their characters, not just the characters that I ended my campaign with, but the ones I began it with originally. Yeah. Remember, this campaign has been going on for a while, and I've had some people leave and others join, and usually that's just kind of the way of things, unless you've got like a really committed group of people like I have on Saturdays. Love those guys. I think the Barra Maze works better with casual groups rather than, you know, groups that are a bit more serious about roleplay and stuff like that. You know, just people who want to hang out, roll dice, eat snacks, and kill monsters. You know, if you want it to be a meaningful story, you're going to have to really adjust the module to make it work, and that'll take a while to do so. I don't think the party roster changing really did me any good either. Running long form stories doesn't really work unless you have the same consistent players. I think I want to start running more like short form adventures that have genuine depth, like rescuing a princess from a cyclops. Right? The adventure could take 4 to 6 weeks, and then with the party being rewarded by the local king, given titles and land, and a seat on the king's council once they bring the princess back home. At least that way, when each story ends, I can just start a new one, see who wants to play, and allow them to either play the same characters or new characters. It's kind of like the many books of Conan the Barbarian. When one story ends, Conan appears in the next book in a completely different part of the world, doing a completely different thing, and has a different job. You know, maybe he's a general, maybe he's a king, maybe he's just a sellsword or a pirate. And it's pretty cool. And usually he's got different allies with him, which could represent the players who decide to re-roll and make new characters, right? Because I know there's a lot of people out there who love making characters and want to try out different concepts. You know, let them. That's a good way of doing it. I did really like the players who I ended the game with, so it did really suck that I had to end it. But they seem to understand my point of view, as well as the time constraints of running a game so late at night. We were starting the game at 11 PM for me, which was pretty brutal. I know some of you guys probably play middle of the night and stuff like that. That's good for you. It wasn't really working for me, right? I get up in the mornings. I'm a normal person. Look at the bags under my eyes. I look like I'm half dead these days. So hopefully I actually get to have some sleep moving forward. I don't plan on giving up, and actually, in fact, I'm working on a new campaign which I plan to advertise through the Start Playing service, which is like an online service for promoting games, free games or paid games, and people could just basically sign up, and it's really, really nice. It's a nice little platform for promoting games, so I'm definitely going to be doing that. I will be sure to be direct and concise with the expectations that I have as a GM, and I hope to find players who align with my expectations. I'm not sure what I'm going to run yet. I've been looking at some old school modules like the Lost City, as well as Castle Ravenloft, which I think would be really fun to run in its entirety. I think it's like 52 pages or something, and that sounds really, really good. But yeah, I haven't decided, so we'll see. I have shared quite a lot of actionable advice today, and I'd like to know what you guys thought of this video in the comment section below. It is a quite personal video. I have shared a lot about my feelings and thoughts, so hopefully you guys will be respectful. Tell me if you like these kind of videos where I shoot a bit more from the hip, or if you prefer what I normally do. Make sure you guys join our public Discord. The link is in the comment section below if you'd like to keep up to date with everything going on in our community. And also feel free to become a patron on Patreon to gain access to all of the previous content I've made, which is lots of systems, mechanics, charts, and tables. There's some really good stuff on there. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time on Loki's Lair. Until then.